I want to talk to you about the Menger sponge and a little bit about my journey in making a rather big Menger sponge using Legos. Now, if you're not familiar with the Menger sponge, let's do a little bit of an introduction. We start with the cube. So here's a cube, and nothing very unusual about it yet, but here's the idea. We're going to take the cube, and in each face, we're going to drill a hole down through the center. And we're going to do that in every single direction. So there's basically 3 directions. All right, so we'll call this a level 0. Nothing's been drilled yet. So after we've drilled all the holes, we're going to get something that looks like this. So this is what we call level 1. We've drilled 1 set of holes. And you see, okay, great, cool, that's kind of fun. But why stop there? You're right. Why? Let's keep going. So what are we going to do? Well, so previously we said, let's drill a hole through the center. Well, what's the center now? So what we'll do is we'll think of the face here. You could almost imagine dividing it up into parts. And we took out the center part. And then there's 8 little parts around it. So we're going to drill a hole in each one of those centers. And not only in this direction, but in this direction and in this direction. So that's a lot of holes. That's right, we're going to make a very holy object. And this is going to be the Menger sponge level 2. There we go. So you can line it up and we go straight through. And in every single direction, we have all these holes. And now you might say, oh, that's kind of cool. But why stop there? And you're right, we don't. So when we talk about the Menger sponge, it says you keep going. So you're going to drill more holes. And then after you drill those, you're going to drill even more holes and more holes and more holes. Now, of course, mathematically, sure, we can do that. Practically, there get to be challenges. And so, all right, so this is what a level 2 looks like. Could we build a level 3? Well, the answer is yes. And it looks something like this. Okay, so this is a level 3 Menger sponge. And it's pretty large. To help give you a sense of how big, there's a Lego Banana Man there for scale. But again, it's the same principle. You started with a big cube, then you took out the center, and then you went and just took out the smaller centers, and then you took out the smaller centers. And of course, you could keep going. Well, you could if you had enough Lego, but that's the level 3 Menger sponge made out of Lego. So a fun little project if you happen to have 32,000 pieces laying around. But, well, you can always buy them, right? All right, good. Whew. Let's put that away. So, what do we want to do today? We want to accomplish 2 things. The first thing is we want to actually show you how to make a very small Menger sponge so that you can get a flavor for what's going on. And then the second thing is we're going to say, all right, why should we care about this? What's the mathematically interesting thing going on? And we'll actually use some Lego to help develop our ideas and our intuition. Okay, well, let's get started with some building. So the particular type of Lego brick that we're going to be using is called headlight. If you go onto the Lego website, it also refers to it as angular, and it's part number 4070. And all of the different Menger sponges that we showed were all built with the same brick. You just have to have enough pieces. We're in particular going to need 120 pieces. So go out, track down 120 of these parts, and we'll be able to make a nice, very small little Menger sponge. All right. Well, before we get too far along, there's 2 important objects that you should know how to build, and they're L's. And the reason we call them L's is because when you put the things together, it makes an L shape. So you take 3 of the bricks and you connect, and there's some sort of a slight twisting going on in some sense. And depending upon how you do it, you can do it in one of 2 ways. You get 2 different outcomes, which means that there's actually a choice. There's an asymmetry going on here. So depending upon which type of brick you choose, which orientation you choose, you'll have something slightly different. But you'll have the mirror image of that, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. So with your parts, you're going to make 8 L's in one orientation and then 32 L's in the other orientation. So essentially there's a 1 to 4 difference here. And now that you have your L's ready to go, you'll start by taking one of each orientation, and you'll turn them slightly and connect, and you'll form almost a little cube. Well, there's some corners missing. And if you were to look at this little cube from above, you might recognize this. This is the same image that's used for the Lego Creator Expert logo, at least it was as of a few years ago. All right, so you're going to do that now with all of a pair from one of each. Now that we finished that, we turn to our next round, which is we're going to take two parts with the same orientation, and then we're going to turn them and connect them together. And now they don't form a little cube, they form sort of a thicker L. So we're going to make a lot of these thicker L's. So just repeat that for the remaining parts. At this point, we've now made 20 blocks. We've made 8 little cubes, and these are going to act as the corners, and then 12 of these thickened L's, and these are going to be our sides. So what we need to do now is we're going to take a cube, and we're going to take 3 L's, but we'll just start with 1. And we want to find a way to connect so that we get a nice little corner here. Now you'll notice it's not working so well, but if it doesn't work well, just turn the piece around. So that it goes in, and you have that nice corner going in. And once you have that, we just connect 3 more parts. And the last thing to do is to take an opposite corner and connect it on the other side. Again, you might need to turn it around, and there we go. So this is our next part we want to build. So now we're going to want to have 4 of these. Now that we have our 4 pieces, we're almost done. We'll just take 2 of them, turn them towards each other, and connect them together. And well, sometimes they go in, sometimes you have to be gentle. Show them a little bit of tender loving care. And we'll do that again. And now we take these 2 sides and we push them in, and in they go. And now we have a very beautiful, lovely Menger sponge. Now, one of the things that makes this really lovely is it has symmetry. So that is, if we turn it 90 degrees, it looks exactly the same. Or if we change to a different face, exactly the same. And so this is a beautiful thing because now we can tile with it. In fact, if you make an exact copy, you'll be able to connect in any different direction that you want to go. And so you can glue little Menger sponges together, and we'll do that in just a second. What would have happened if we had chosen a different ratio? So remember, we chose a 4-to-1 ratio of the different L's. And so if we had changed it to the other direction, we would end up with a mirror image. So these two were built with the exact same process. We just used the mirror pieces of the L's to put things together. And you'll notice that, well, they're mirrors. You could, in other words, draw a line and they'd be exactly symmetrical across that line. Unfortunately, these don't work great because if you try to push them together, you'll see that studs are lining up with studs. And, well, that's not how Lego works. And so you don't want that. So that's actually great news for us. That means we don't have to worry about, which orientation we're using. We just pick an orientation from the very beginning and stick to it all the way to the end. Now that we know how to make a level 1 Menger sponge, how do we go about making a level 2? Well, there's actually a really nice way to think about how Menger sponges connect together. And we can take a bunch of level 1s and produce a level 2. So think about how we built a level 1 though. Well, we really had 20 pieces, 8 corners and 12 edges, and each little block came together. So how do we make a level 2? Well, the answer is we're going to start with 20 level 1s. Each one is a block. We're going to have 8 for our corners and 12 for our edges. And then we put them together. So here we go. Here's 20 level 1s. Now, we're going to have actually 2 slightly different patterns, but that's just coloring. The design is the exact same as what we've already done. And so if you think about that, you say, okay, take a corner, and now we're just going to take and connect a corner with 3 of the edges. So we'll get something like this. And, well, sometimes it takes a little bit. So there's a little corner. And now, in the spirit of what we did before, let's just connect one more opposite corner. Okay, so there's one of our 4 pieces. Let's make 3 more of these. Once you have these 4 completed, well, you take 2 of them and you're going to connect. So here, line them up and connect them together. Do that again for our other pair. And so again, we're taking our 2. We're going to line them up, push them together. And of course, it gets a little bit more challenging because there's a lot of connections that have to be made simultaneously. And now you have your 2 halves, and 2 halves, of course, makes a whole. So line them up and push them together. And if we do it, we have our beautiful level 2 Menger sponge. Nice, great. Now I will say that there are some other ways you can build a level 2 Menger sponge, and I'll post a separate video which makes one that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and also takes fewer pieces. So it's a really good travel level 2 Menger sponge. But for now, we say, all right, wonderful. We know how to build a level 2. Now you're thinking, oh, what about level 3? Well, one way you could certainly do it is build 20 of these and put them together, and then you'd have a level 3. Well, that's one way, and it works. It's great. And now we actually are ready to turn to the second part of what we wanted to do. Remember, we also wanted to talk about math. Why do we care about these things? The mathematical question that we're interested in is asking ourselves the question, what's the dimension of this object? In other words, is this a 3-dimensional object? Is it a 2-dimensional object? Or is it something else altogether? And how can we figure that out? So what can we do to answer that question? Now you might be thinking, that doesn't seem like a very hard question. I mean, we started with a 3-dimensional object. We built it in 3-dimensional space. It's 3-dimensional, right? I mean, it seems pretty reasonable. But let's think about an object. So here's an object, and it's a nice 3-dimensional object, right? Or is it? Well, actually, you can open it up, and you'll see it's an empty shell. So there's no thickness here. So it's a 2-dimensional object in that we can travel in 2 different directions, but we can't move in a 3rd direction. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it's like if you think about the surface of a sphere, that's 2-dimensional, while the whole sphere is 3-dimensional. It's a lot like a M&M candy, right? You've got your candy coating, and then of course you've got your chocolate interior. All right, so well, there's some subtlety. Okay, so is the Menger sponge, is it like the surface of the thing, or is it the interior, or something else? So how do we figure that out? Well, we ask a very simple question. How much material is needed to scale by a factor of 3? So I'm taking an object, and I want to make it 3 times larger. How much material do we need? So let's think about things that we're very familiar with and very comfortable with. And once we understand the answer to those questions, we'll answer it for the Menger sponge, and we'll get our answer to what the dimension is. So the first object we're very familiar with is a line. So let's represent our line by a Lego. Okay, so there's some Legos. And now I want to scale this by a factor of 3. And here I'm scaling, a line is 1-dimensional, so I'm only scaling in one direction. And so the result will be something that looks like that. It's 3 times as large in that one direction. So what's the answer? Well, how much more material do you need? How much more Lego do you need to make one of these versus one of those? The answer will probably not surprise you, is that you need 3 times as much, which really you're thinking, oh, it's 3 to the 1. Now, where's that 1? The 1 is because it's 1-dimensional. All right, Great. Well, that's good to know. Okay, so now that we know a line, how about a rectangle? Okay, we can do that. So again, there's a rectangle built using Lego, and we'll scale now in 2 different directions. So I'm 3 times as large and 3 times as large. So how much more material is needed for that rectangle? Another way to think about that is how many copies do I have to do of the smaller rectangle to get that larger rectangle? Well, the answer is you'll need 9 copies. Now what's 9? That's 3 squared. All right, good. And you can even check it, right? Just imagine you move that piece around and you will in fact take up exactly 9 times as much. Okay. So again, a rectangle, 2-dimensional object. 2 up here in the exponent. Great. There's a pattern emerging. In fact, we probably know the punchline coming, right? For the next case, which is a box. So now this actually has 3 directions. It's 3 by 4 by 2. So there's my box. And now imagine you scale it. So I'm going to scale it 3 times as much in one direction, 3 times as much in the other direction, and also 3 times as much in the third direction as well. So how much Lego do you need? In comparison, like how much more do we need? So what's the answer? So for a box, well, because if you think about it, you can say, look, I'll copy, 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 but that's just sort of like one layer. I need to do that for each layer. So the answer is 27, which is 3 cubed. And great. So we're seeing a pattern here. What we're seeing is we know how to find the dimension, or at least we know where the dimension is showing up if we ask the question, how much more do we need when we scale? So now we can turn to our Menger sponge and ask ourselves the same question. How much more material do we need if we're going to scale? So let's step back and just recall what we've done. We took our nice level 1 Menger sponge that we built, and what did we do? Well, we took a lot of copies of it. And in particular, if you take 20 copies, you'll get a level 2. And you can see the size here. It's exactly 3 times as much. 3 times as much. So, all right. So if I want to scale by a factor of 3 going from here to there, then I'm going to need 20 times as much material. All right. Well, that's the key idea. So for a Menger sponge, the answer is 20. Well, wait, hold on. What does that mean? Well, it's not 2-dimensional, because 2-dimensional would say you need 9 times as much. So it's more than 2. And it's not 3-dimensional, because 3-dimensional we'd need 27 times as much, and 20 is below 27. So we're in between 2 and 3. And so it's something else. So it turns out, if we say, all right, what's the exponent? Well, it would be 2.7268 ... So that's the exponent that works. So this part right here, that's our dimension of our Menger sponge. And this is an example of something which is known as a fractal. So a fractal, you can think of it as an object which has a fractional dimension. It's not a whole number like we're used to. It also is oftentimes an object that exhibits a lot of sort of recursiveness. And if you think about what happened to build a level 1 was very similar to building a level 2. It's just we needed bigger initial inputs. But the processes were the same. Amazing. Amazing. Well, thanks for joining me. I hope you had fun and learned something along the way. I will say that once you get the hang of working with this piece, it's incredibly versatile, and you can make all sorts of fun and amazing things with it. So one of the things that you can do is you could start and say, hey, we know how to make a Menger sponge. But could we do the complement? In other words, do the sort of opposite. So don't build what's left, build what you took out. And the answer is yes, you can. So you can actually build what you took out to make your Menger sponge, and it makes a really beautiful object. Now the question is, what would happen if you put these two together? Well, you would get a whole cube. And so there's the Menger sponge back with the parts you took out, and you get this nice shape. And of course, there's a lot more that can be done. So I hope you have fun and keep building, and take care.